Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm your host, as always, Charlotte Stebbing-Mills. And if you are a long-term listener to this show and not yet subscribed, please go ahead and do so to make sure you don't miss any episodes. Because, as always, I'm joined today by another awesome guest. And I want to introduce you to the lovely Cortney McDermott, who she's so many things, but I mean the standard bio is that she's a best-selling author, TEDx speaker. She's done work that's been featured in Inc., Women's Health, Success, Huffington Post, Fox News, and so much more. And I believe she's the perfect guest for this show for many, many reasons, but one of which is like the wealth of experience she has professionally from her time as an executive at Vanity Fair Corporation, vice president at Sustainability Partners, and then running her own businesses, which have worked with clients and audiences at Universal Music Group, Google, Nike, and Virgin Unite as well. So welcome to the show, Cortney. It's so good to see you again.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to chat again.
I know, right? We keep saying again, right? So our listeners are probably like, what do you mean again? Because we actually have, our listeners actually might not know this for this podcast. We have another podcast called Stress Relief in Your Pocket, which is focused really on the individual who is looking to overcome stress, burnout, and overwhelm, and instead live in health, high performance, and happiness. And basically, Cortney, obviously yourself, you've been a guest on that podcast previously, and I loved our conversation so much, and I love you so much, and I'm sure our listeners will get an idea as to why as they start to listen to your insights, your experience, and just your energy as they kind of watch or listen to this episode. So, Cortney, I would love for you to start by telling us, why are you somebody that our listeners should listen to when it comes to thriving in the workplace?
Well, I think you should listen to only people who are in resonance with you. So if you're listening and something's not in resonance, then it's not the right moment, maybe not the right person. But I think that specifically for this audience, it's what I've seen time and time again is when I come in and I work with executives, I work with corporations, some of the largest corporations in the world. And what I see is the approach that you have to have has to have some of that experience of having lived through that, because there is so much stress and burnout and just hamster wheel nature of the beast. It's of any quarterly driven business, really. And so starting to understand that there might be a better way first requires that you have had experience in the other way, in my opinion. So that's been really helpful in terms of just, okay, no, I really do get where you're at. And I found this other approach, both within organizations and outside of organizations, that really can help you thrive. So,
yeah, love that. So tell us more about your experience, perhaps then, of working in some of those higher pressure roles.
yeah. Well, I remember I wrote about this in my first book. There was this moment when I was working in corporate, and I just remember that I was always kind of inhaling my lunch in front of a computer, and I was, answering a gazillion emails, and I was just nonstop. And I had always told myself, well, I'm gonna meditate. I'll get to meditation, or I'll get to the walk around the block. I'll get to those things. I'll get to those things. But they always got sort of sideswept by the demands, right? And I specifically remember this one day, as I was saying, I wrote about it in the first book, which was I'm sitting at my desk and it's almost lunchtime, and I'm thinking, you know what? Today's the day. Just go for a walk. And I remember leaving my cell phones behind. I remember leaving it all behind and going for a walk. Literally, maybe it was only 10 minutes, but I went for this walk. And I was feeling so good when I got back from the walk that I decided to do something that I thought, well, okay, I shouldn't maybe be doing this on company time, but actually I know now that I should have, which is I closed the blinds on my office. I closed the door and I meditated. It wasn't that long. But when I emerged from that meditation, I had all of these answers to a project that I had been putting off. Because again, we also tend to put off the really important things because we go to the fires. And so I went to this project, and in record time, I just swept through it. It was so fast. It was so easy. And that it was so clear to me what needed to be done. And so I created this whole proposal, and again, record time. And then by the time I was done with that, I thought, I'm actually not even going to check my emails. I'm going to go home.
Mm.
And it was such a radical shift in one day. And when I noticed the results of also how I showed up at home, and then the next day, this was in my mind just crazy. Well, it makes perfect sense now. But when I got back to the office, all of those fires that had come through my inbox, someone else had put them out.
Mm.
And they really weren't that important anyway.
Mm.
And so I started to think, okay, wait a second, maybe I got this a little bit backwards. And I started to play with time. I started to play with my relationship with time. I do whole courses on this now. So it's like, you know, I'm really all about radically altering the way that you live through the space-time continuum. So, but yeah, I just realized, wow, you know, we have this sense of urgency, and most of the time it's a false sense of urgency. And again, I talk about this a lot, so we can go where you want from there, but that is one of the things that I think really stuck out when you asked that question.
It's I love the shift that you had, that it was just like almost within a day there was just this radical turnaround. I think for a lot of people, there is resistance to doing that, right? I remember doing something similar. It wasn't meditating. I think it was literally just, yeah, it was just taking a moment. It was taking time. Company I was working for, they built this it was like a creativity room, right? And somebody had said, you can go in there and just do whatever you want to do. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to take a break. I'm like, this is very novel. I'm going to have a break. What's that? And I went in, but I felt so guilty being in there because there was like a bit of glass on the wall, so I could see the rest of the office as well. And I'm like, well, what are they thinking about me doing this, right? And there was all of that narrative going, all of the workload going. There was all of that narrative happening as well. So I think it's pretty cool that you've had that experience where you just kind of went in and radically did it one day, and everything kind of fell into place. What do you say to somebody that maybe has had an experience more like what I have, and that guilt plays a bit of a factor, or a lot of it?
Yeah, I definitely had that too. I think it's important to realize that that's a story you're telling yourself. And it might also be, for sure, a story that collectively we're
Mhm.
telling ourselves,
Yeah.
no doubt.
Mm.
And, you know, when I always joke that if you see everyone running in one direction, I'll most likely be running in the opposite direction. And it does take a little bit of sitting in that white fire, as I call it. You have to sit in the hottest part of the fire if you really want to transform,
Yeah.
to change form. And I mean literally changing physical form.
Yeah.
So, which we did talk about a little bit on the other podcast. But the point that I would make to anyone again is it's a practice. It took so much practice and efforting to get in that sort of mind, um, call it like a kind of a mind trip, really, of, oh, wait, if I do this and this and this and this other thing, and we kind of just go on all of this banter of it, oh, I have to be moving, I have to keep going, et cetera, versus take that practice a little bit at a time
Mm.
of relaxing.
Yeah.
And people really discount relaxing, but really relaxing is what's going to put you into different brainwave frequencies, which
Yeah.
are going to make solutions readily available to you.
Yeah.
And again, like for example, take that project that I just had, I was in the right frequency for it. I got a major promotion
Yeah.
for that
Yeah.
literally within weeks after I submitted it.
Yeah.
So it does, I wouldn't even say it's counterintuitive, because actually I think it's the most intuitive thing. If you're running around like that, the most intuitive thing that's probably coming through over and over is, I need to rest. I need to rest. I need to rest. And you're not doing it. It isn't counterintuitive. It's countercultural.
Mm.
But, you know, I love this. I don't know where this comes from, but like, realists don't change the world. Unrealistic people do. That might have even been something I wrote in my first book. I can't remember, but I just remember this, like, I remember this idea really kind of permeating every part of me, of like, you can't be so-called realistic or go with like what everyone else is saying about this. You really do have to tread your own path.
Mm. There's so much love about what you just said. And I also hear that, like, as much as I just said when I asked you that question, it was almost like you had this experience where you just went and meditated once, and then suddenly everything's fine. But it took you a long time to get to that point, right? There was all of the days adding up where I should do this, I should do that, right? And then obviously then the journey really starts, and you start to reap the rewards of that. I do want to touch on what you said about time and our relationship with time, because I think this is so important. Because I do think there's the guilt trip that we take ourselves on in the workplace. And for leaders listening to this, I know leaders do this, but also your teams will be doing this as well, typically. Maybe not everyone in the same way, but there'll be a layer of it somewhere, perhaps. But there's not just the guilt, it's then layered on with this almost this scarcity mindset that there's not enough time, right? And I think that's where
Mm.
the urgency then takes place, and that's where we go into this primal brainwave state, right? And then we're all
Yeah.
just like chasing our tail constantly. So tell us a little bit more about, what do we need to know about time, and maybe the space-time continuum that talks to those issues that are very, very prominent in the workplace.
Right. So I share a little bit a time model that's really helped me put this into perspective in both of the books, actually. I think it's in both of the books because it's been so powerful, such a powerful shift for me. Is I share these four concentric circles, and the outermost circle is the dimension of distraction, right? And we all partake in this dimension. It's like the scrolling on the phone or whatever else it is that kind of just calm your nervous system a little bit most of the time, right? So this is when we're focused on things that aren't really important and they're not really urgent, right?
Mm,
And then you go one more in and you're in the dimension of delusion.
mm,
And this is when you think you're focused on something really important,
yeah,
but actually it's really not that important. And it's definitely not even urgent.
yeah,
And that a great example of that is email. The best way I ever heard email described was a great organizing mechanism for other people's priorities,
yeah,
right? So
yes,
we've got distraction, we've got delusion, and then one more in, we've got this dimension of demand.
yeah,
And the issue with high performers is they've lumped a lot of things in there that don't belong in there. And demand is where you're focused on things that are important and they're urgent.
yeah,
There is actually very, very little in life that's important and urgent. Okay. So an example would be someone that you love who really needs you.
mm,
You're going to drop everything to help that person because that is demand. It's urgent, and normally demand will do all sorts of crazy things in our nervous system, which can help us in the short term, right? So they can spike cortisol, they can spike all sorts of things that like get us all ready to, we're on all fours ready to, to go for it, right? And that can be useful in small doses because there's adrenaline, there's all the norepinephrine, like there's all these things that kick in. But the thing is that if we live too much in that, we wear out
yeah,
really quickly, and you can see it and you can feel it. And I mean, literally, you can physically see it on people all over. And so, lots of times things shouldn't really be lumped in there. So you have to be really kind of mindful. And then that next dimension in, which is the bullseye, is the dimension of design.
mm,
And that's where you're focused on things that are really important, but they're not urgent.
yeah,
And I discovered it by accident that day in my office when I went for the walk, when I did the meditation, when I worked on that project and silenced everything else while I was doing it.
yeah,
When you start to actually prioritize that dimension, something really wild happens
yeah,
with this thing that we call the space-time continuum, in that what you have been trying to achieve
mm,
kind of achieves you.
yeah,
Because rather than the doing, you have actually become, and as a result, the doing happens through you.
yeah,
And it feels almost effortless. I mean, there's sometimes where you're still going to be feeling that efforting, but I would suggest every
mm,
time you're feeling that efforting that doesn't feel good, because there's an efforting that feels good
yeah,
and an efforting that doesn't feel good.
yeah,
And every time you're feeling that efforting that doesn't feel good, time out,
yeah,
just like you would with a little kid. And
yeah,
I have very specific strategies for this and things that I tell people, because I'm like, we need to do this to reset everything, to reset your autonomic nervous system, to reset your brainwave frequency, to put you in a different brainwave frequencies, like I was saying before,
yeah.
to really start to also set off some of those neurochemicals that are actually going to help you rather than hinder what it is that you're trying to get done. So
Mm.
yeah.
I'm hearing a lot in there as well around like, it's more about who you're being, not what you're doing. And I think that's a very common thread when we start to look at the leadership conversation and the narrative, particularly in this region, is there's a lot of workplace well-being solutions that are very much around do it this way, do it that way. There are few, they exist, but there are very few and far between that's looking at who are you showing up as in the workplace. And we're definitely coming to a place where we're very aware that we need more conscious leadership. We need people that can actually lead with empathy and lead with a softer sense of power, without it being toxic or abusive or taking advantage of anyone and things like that. But what I hear about what you did as well is like you was looking at who are you being whilst then designing the future of work for yourself. But perhaps you didn't know you were designing it at the time. You were just being it and then the design came. Is that right?
Yeah, I was paying attention to what was really important to me. I started to pay more and more attention to
Mm,
what's really important to me.
mm,
And as we know, our attention holds potentially infinite power,
yeah,
right? We know this from the concept of the wavicle, right? A particle is a wave at the same time.
yeah,
It's a wave up into the point of observation,
yeah,
i.e., attention, at
yeah,
which point the wave function is translated essentially into a particle or material reality, right? So it's the physical, right? It goes from non-physical to physical.
yeah,
And so what I've realized over and over and over again, and the more I realize it, the more I play with it, and the more I play with it, the more fun I have, is whoa, where am I putting my attention? And it's not just a platitude, it's not just a cliche. It's really one of your most powerful assets. In fact, companies are investing trillions annually to capture it. That's how powerful it is.
yeah.
So when you take that power back and you say, what's really important to me, and you prioritize it, what happens is, because I often kind of joke, we actually don't all have the same 24 hours in a day. Like I sometimes feel, and actually I often feel like in a day, I've lived lifetimes. I've lived a lifetime in a day.
Yeah.
And so I really invite people to play with this because I've seen it over and over in my life and my clients' lives and the lives of the people I've worked with, is you sort of you flip it.
Yeah.
And so now all of a sudden you have all this time, like for example, busy is a word that I just completely removed from my lexicon a couple years back. I mean, probably more than that. I think it's been 3, 4 years. I absolutely will not use that word. And if anyone says you're busy, I always contradict that and I say, I'm not busy at all. I'm not busy at all.
What do you say instead? Because I've been playing around with this, and I'm still the word busy still creeps in.
Well, here's the thing. Here you caught yourself right in that moment where you're afraid or where you're considering, I guess, what other people think.
Mm,
And the more, because the thing is, we say busy because it's seen as a badge of honor. We say it as like, oh, I've got all these things, on my plate, or we want to submit it with something that's equally as, like energetic. And I'm doing all these things, and don't worry, I haven't stopped, right? And because it's like, God forbid, right, that we should actually challenge these paradigms that we absolutely
yeah.
critically need to challenge if we want to stay in this form. We're just going to change form, but and then that's thermodynamics. But anyway, that's another conversation. But the point is, we need to shift, right? So I actually catch myself in that moment where I say, well, what do I say instead?
Mm,
I stop.
yeah.
I stop and I look at, where's the need to say something coming from?
Mm,
Where is my need to justify
mm,
my being here coming from?
mm,
And whoa, that'll start to open you up to a lot of new worlds, because when you actually sit with it, you're like, oh, dang, right? I was sort of in this, I was sort of in this like spiral of needing to prove something. Like, am I enough? Do I count? Do I matter here? Am
mm,
I worthy?
yeah.
And I've seen that over and over in the workplace, like in and outside of the workplace, but I see it especially with high performers, is when it comes down to it, there's this huge vein of like, I
Mm,
don't feel worthy.
yeah.
I need to do to try to prove something.
Yeah.
And we get in this quote unquote performance mindset.
Yeah.
And I talk about the so-called miracles, which are not miracles really. They're just the natural occurrence of when you move from performance to play.
Yeah. Just to your point before, because I want us to go into that a little bit more, the performance and play relationship. It's so common, I think, again, everywhere, but particularly in this region, that proving nature, because it's rewarded so healthily or so unhealthily. It's rewarded a lot here. Um, and it's this game that a lot of people are playing, and they get stuck into that hustle and the rat race of it. And we're seeing incredible burnout rates here.
Mhm.
It's quite scary, the burnout rates. And it's something that, like you said, a shift needs to happen, but a lot of it is stemming from that place. So I really hope our leaders that are listening to this can start to perhaps look at those questions with their team. That doesn't mean you have to become a therapist. It just means being able to acknowledge what else is going on for this person, other than perhaps what you can see on the surface. There could actually be something else to explore here.
Right. And I also am not a therapist. And if anything, I'm a scientist on different levels. I mean, I have a master's in sciences and things, but the point is, I actually go to the science. I want to show through the science why this makes so much more sense. So
Yes.
even for example, if you just take, and there's so many different pieces of information that you could pull to sustain this argument, but the if you even just take brainwave frequencies, and we're very well aware of what's happening when you're in that rush, 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 do, you're in beta. And
Yeah.
most of the time you're in high beta. And the best way I ever heard this described was like having a 4-gear race car and driving it around in first gear all day long. Actually, I even heard it a little bit better, although they weren't, neither one of these, I think, was talking specifically about brainwave frequencies, but I heard it even better. The car doesn't work and you're pushing it up a hill rather
Mm.
than going to get the engine sorted out so
Yes.
that you can drive it wherever you want to go.
Mm.
And it's so counter, it just makes no sense whatsoever to continue to do that, because you're just wearing down, and you can feel it in yourself,
Yeah.
so I do think, yes, 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 it's all happening. And when you're considering it, it's not just some nice to do. It's not like, oh, I stand in front of the mirror and I repeat some affirmations to myself. No, there's actually like a lot of science behind the power of how much better you're going to be in terms of even your quote unquote performance, if we go back to that. But yeah,
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because the narrative of an organization is we're too busy to do that. Right? It's almost
exactly.
like having to press pause to some extent so that you can then push forward after, like pulling an elastic band back and then letting it just propel forwards even faster. Like I think there's so much benefit to that, but it's how do we perhaps as leaders catch ourselves not being able to do that, to then being able to
Mhm.
do that at an organizational level. Like what have you seen perhaps from like Google and the likes of Nike and the people that you've been working with? And obviously you don't have to say specifically who it is, but have you seen any like really interesting ways that this has been implemented?
Yes, I've seen over and over the people at the absolute top of their game are all using what I'm talking about in
Yeah.
some form or another. They're
Yep.
all doing it.
Mhm.
And they will take long stretches where they'll go, for example, without their phones. They'll just disappear literally, like into the woods. They will take the time in the office to sit and meditate.
Yeah.
I remember watching 1 or 2 episodes of that show, Billionaire. I think it's called, or Billions. I don't know what, I think it's called Billions. But there's this guy who runs all these companies, and he's a billionaire. And you see him often in the show just meditating, and then boom, the answers come. And this is so sustained by the research. And I even write a bit about this in the book, how to do that and how to move into some of these different states. But that is what I see over and over, is that the people who are at the highest point of their games, and kind of in every way, not just in terms of what they're doing workplace wise, but what they're doing in their lives, they are taking so much time.
Yeah.
Like I feel like too, I have so much time to do so many things that I love to do. I don't do, my days are varied, extremely varied. It's like my interests are very eclectic. I
Yeah.
get to, basically just enjoy
Mm.
all of this without it being, oh, you've got to get somewhere.
Yeah.
And I do see that over and over. And I get to work with, I work with major celebrities. I work with top people in the biggest corporations in the world. So it's like I see over and over they're actually doing this. So this isn't like, oh, they're just running themselves ragged. No, no, no. They're really taking the time to reassess and change their relationship with time,
Mm.
like we've been talking about.
And I think that's really important as well for people to hear, because you don't always see that, right? Is there's an
Right.
assumption that gets made based on the culture that we live in, that that's how we're supposed to do it and that's how it's always been done. But actually, often, if we're not seeing the show, like shows, and we're not seeing the best of the best actually doing it, like then there's no role model to doing it, right? There's no one to learn from that's doing it. If we've got a CEO, for example, that's in this region that doesn't have a network, perhaps, that is employing a lot of these exercises, right, and these practices, they're just making up best based on their own experience and their own conditioning. So I think, what role have you seen the community element play at the most senior levels, and having those role models in play?
Well, I think, first of all, you do have to seek out these role models, and they do exist. And two that come straight to mind, really, really fast to mind for whatever reason, as soon as you were talking about it, were Steve Jobs
Yep.
and and oh gosh, Michael Singer.
Yep.
And they both obviously worked in tech and software, but it was funny because I found out I had read this book years ago, autobiography of a yogi, and I've reread it and I've listened to it. It's a really fascinating work, and now I'm living close to where Yogananda had his fellowship, and I found out that Steve Jobs actually read that book every single year.
Mm.
It's the stuff you don't know about these leaders. You don't know it, but it's there. That's how they achieve that. Why do you think he simplified everything? He went to the simplest. It's almost like he went down to the atom, right? Or Michael Singer is a great example. I love it because he talks about how he just dedicated himself. He devoted himself to his meditation practice, to his, and I'm not saying that you have to do that and be, a yogi or whatever else. All I'm saying is that find out what's important to you and pursue it. And it doesn't need to be like just one thing, but really getting to that place where you start to understand that in using those role models, because those role models are really important. It's like the 4 Minute Mile, right? Roger Bannister. No one thought that the 4 Minute Mile was a possibility. It was the farthest thing from anyone's mind. And then Roger Bannister comes along. I think that was right after, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was after, was that World War II or World War I? Anyway, he comes along and he runs it in I think in 4 minutes. And then the very next year, how many runners, or that same year, ran it in that same time? And now it's just basic. I mean, it's just like, oh, you got to do that to qualify for most marathons, or a lot of the marathons out there. So the thing is, we do need to see other people doing it. And that's something called entrainment. We need to know that it's possible. And what I'm here saying from my own life experience and from the experience of people I've looked for, because I also was in a very tangled up hamster wheel kind of place.
Yeah.
And everything I'm saying actually completely reversed that, and made it so that all of this that I'm talking about was at disposition. But it didn't just occur. It occurred by focusing on things that were really important to me. They did go countercultural lots of times, and they still do. I mean, I still go rogue all the time.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, everyone's doing that. Oh man. Oh, okay. I'm going rogue again, and it's an experiment, and you have got to let yourself experiment. Because guess what? No one gets to their end of their lives being, saying, oh gosh, I really wish I'd worked more hours. I wish I'd stayed longer in the office. I wish I'd, spent more time on my computer. I wish I'd been more preoccupied with money. I wish I'd been, like crappy to everybody I know a little bit more. And no one says that, trust me, when they're about to leave this dimension, or their humanness is about to, change form. But, or their beingness, I don't know, is about to change form. But yeah, so that's, I think, what we need to just wake up now. And you don't need a whole journey. You don't need to go and do a week, of Vipassana or whatever. Like, that's great, fine, cool. But you actually don't need that. You can literally wake up right now and say, I'm going to start these experiments now, today, this moment. And I'm just going to see. And rather than saying, oh, I'm going to give it a week, give it a little bit longer, because all the conditioning and the habit formation that has set you to where you are now took longer. And this will actually take less time, because your frequency is such that it will take less time to start changing the physical. It will take much less time, but you do have to have that consistency. Like Einstein was talking about, the eighth wonder of the universe is compound interest. So
I love that. I haven't heard that before. I like that. Um, so much value in what you just said there. Excuse me. There's another really good book actually, that our listeners might quite like to listen to or read, called The Buddha and the Badass by Vishen Lakhiani, the founder of Mind Valley. He's another really good role model for kind of leading, how he's led a business from leaning into all of these different experiments, really. And maybe you don't want to run a business the way he does or like he does, but there'll be some elements of it in there that really, really could resonate, and things that you can actually really go and practice within an organization as well, not just as an individual and as a leader. And I have to say, actually, as you're saying this as well, I know from my own experience from letting go of the norm. I still catch myself in it at times, and I don't know if it's definitely a story, but there's something about this region that is like, it's very contractual. It's very like, it contracts and it expands, and we see this in the seasons, right? It's like September through to the start of December, it's like contraction. Everybody's on it, everybody's going like business, business, business. December, everyone pauses, breathes. There's almost an expansion happening, and then from January right through until like June, it's the same again, and there's this constant like flux happening. And I think it's a really beautiful thing, but I do also think that we can get caught up in that if we're not careful. And I see that from my contrast of living in Thailand and then coming back into this space and trying to upkeep the same energy that I perhaps had there, and the same level of practices that I had there. It's very different. So I've had to experiment as to what does that look like in my different seasons. And when I have really found that sweet spot for me, because it is different for everyone, like you, I find there's a lot more joy in what I do. There are days where I'm like, I could be on my last days and I'd be like, I'm okay if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, even if I spent my
Yeah.
day doing this, and it might be delivering a workshop. But
Yeah.
and that's completely okay. It's not, but it doesn't feel like work, like you've said. And it's those moments that keep me motivated to stay on this path.
Yes, exactly. And what you're talking about is so important, because what we're saying here is not, oh, stop working and just go meditate all day. Because actually, when you integrate some of these practices, which may or may not be, I mean, I have a whole take on meditation. I'll leave that aside for a second, but it could be whatever it is that is really calling to you. What happens is actually there's so much joy in working.
Mm.
There's so much joy in creative expression. It's just the funnest thing. I mean, it's so much fun.
Yep.
And until it's not,
Yep.
until it becomes like, oh, I need a timeout.
Yep.
And it's beautiful when you start to play with those waves of like, whoa, yeah, I'm riding this wave and now I'm just relaxing over here. Now I'm like just fully in this tunnel and now I'm just relaxing. I don't surf. I wish I did, but I gave a talk for the surf industry years ago, but but I don't know how to surf. I also, by the way, gave a talk at Mind Valley University, and it's a great example of what we're talking about here, because when I went, I didn't know if I was going to be giving the talk, and it had this, like, I got relaxed and goofy, and then I ended up giving that talk, and it was a really, really great talk about how to change without doing anything, because
Mm.
they wanted people to understand, like, it's a kind of one of the central teachings of the Tao. In fact, it's really funny. My daughter said to me weeks ago, I was like, whoa, I was blown away when she said this to me. She said, Mom, if you don't know what to do, don't do anything. And I thought, holy smokes. I mean, that's like Lao Tzu right there. That is so Marshall. I was so blown away. I just go, whoa, exactly. Exactly. Right now I'm spinning. In
Mm.
that precise moment, I was a little spinning with her. And I said, oh my God, yeah, thank you. I mean, in the non-doing, it is
Yep.
done. Everything is done.
How does that
That's,
how does
yeah.
that translate practically though? Let's say like in an organization where perhaps there is leadership that are stalling on something, or they're not acting when actually there is some action that's actually required for the sake of the business, or for the sake of the teams, or something like that.
Yeah. Well, because again, this is the key point of, like, the difference between you are it and you're sort of almost, I don't know how to call this action, that I'm kind of like, you're grasping at it. You're trying to, it's one of the things that I said yesterday. I was in an interview yesterday and I was saying, um, you're trying to find what's something along the lines of, like, you're trying to find what's already yours.
Mm.
You're trying to find what's already yours. And the more you actually go in this hyper mode of, like, I have to find it, I have to find it, the more you miss that it's already, that potential is already existing as a probability outcome in the field right now. And
Yeah.
I'm like literally talking about your physical, and
Yeah.
non-physical field.
Yes.
So the thing that is, like, so important for people to understand when they're in that is, okay, I just need to relax. And
Mm.
again, I know that goes so countercultural, but the minute you relax, we start to see what happens is we literally just start to open up again to these potentials that we couldn't be open to before. We just couldn't be. They're all there.
Yeah.
They're all existing simultaneously, but we couldn't actually open ourselves to them. And
Mm.
so then the action is a consequence. The action is a natural consequence. It is a byproduct
Mm.
of who you're being, of the and I mean that even in a global perspective, in terms of who the organization is, but what the organization actually represents. It's a
Yeah.
byproduct. Like,
Yeah.
for example, if I consider myself a healthy, active person, a byproduct of that is going to be I'm going to be moving a lot. Like, I'm going to be moving my body. A
Yeah.
byproduct is I'm going to be noting what I put in my body, right?
Mm.
I'm going to be paying attention to what Hippocrates was talking about when he said, let thy food be thy medicine, right? Or something along those lines. I'm just going to naturally, that's going to occur naturally.
Mm.
And so then all the spinning of like, what do we do? Or the stalling, which arises from
Mm.
spinning. It's like that line in the Bible where it says, look at the daisies. I think it's the daisies of the field. They neither toil nor spin.
Mm.
And I don't belong to any particular denomination, but the idea, I'm fascinated by all spiritual traditions, but the idea is, it's like, you don't have to toil and spin.
Mm.
You can leave that, and you can kind of be at the center, sort of the eye of the storm.
Yeah.
And when you are that, things will gravitate toward you. And
Mm.
again, this isn't woo woo. This is very much backed by everything from neuroscience to epigenetics to quantum physics. Like, it's very clearly in some main central key findings for all of
Mm.
those fields, to just
Yeah.
name a few.
Mm. I can definitely see that. And I think, to bring it back to the scenario, I guess, that I was thinking of when I asked that question, is it's not about, let's say, a leader not doing anything when something happens, because sometimes that can be coming from a place of just blocking, right? And then you're still doing something. That's not a leader that's relaxing to connect to their resource, right? And to be able to then access solutions. So there's a big difference there, isn't there, between perhaps somebody that's just holding on and like gripping something so tightly that nothing is moving, versus letting go and being able to relax into it, find the answers, find whatever the solution is that the organization or the team needs to be able to then move forwards. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yeah, and again, if you think relaxing is hard, or you think you can't do it, I'm reminded of the Dalai Lama saying, if you think you can't meditate for 5 minutes, meditate for an hour.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, really, what are we talking about? I mean, if you knew, and I sometimes like to give people the exercise of, I say, if you had 9 months left to live, what
Yeah.
would you do? If you had 9 weeks, if you had 9 days, if you had
Yeah.
9 hours, it really focuses your attention.
Yeah.
And those things that we've been talking about here, it's really simple.
Yeah.
And simple it eludes us most of the time. But as Da Vinci put it, it's the ultimate sophistication. I mean, it's so simple. And I often tell leaders when they say, well, it's not like I can just go lay down or go meditate or whatever. I say, yawn for 30 seconds, set a timer on your phone, and yawn. You and I even talked about this in a previous conversation, but yawning is actually considered one of the best kept secrets of neuroscience. It energizes you and it relaxes you at the same time. It sends a message to your vagus nerve, which is the largest nerve in your body, saying I'm safe,
Yeah.
which you can't really take. You can't take clear, guided, beautiful action if you don't feel safe.
Mm.
And lots of times in these environments, we don't.
Yeah.
So it's literally, and it also releases like oxytocin and serotonin, all these really great bonding chemicals and chemicals that help you feel better. So it's just yawn, set a timer on your phone, yawn for 30 seconds throughout your day. You're going to start to see some massive shifts. That could be your meditation. I actually say that and laughing are the highest forms of meditation, in my opinion, my humble opinion.
Imagine starting every meeting at work with a yawn or a laugh, right? And finishing
Yes.
every meeting with a yawn and a laugh, right? That's a simple thing that anybody listening to this could implement, right? It might feel a bit silly at first, right? But that's just narrative, right? Try it and experiment, like you
Exactly.
said, and see what happens. What have you got to lose? It costs you nothing. It does barely cost you any time. Well, it doesn't cost any money at all. It's Yeah, I like that tip. I think that's a nice little hack that anyone could
Yeah.
do. Listen, I want to be
Yeah.
mindful of the time, but I do want to touch on work-life balance with you, because and I know we kind of talked around time and performance and things today, and obviously our relationship to that, but here I think everywhere there is a big debate about work-life balance. Like, can we actually achieve it? Is this real? Is this not real? I'd love to hear your take on it.
Yeah, actually, years ago, I was talking about balance as a myth. And I even wrote some articles, I think, for the Huffington Post at that time, because I was so perturbed by this myth of balance, right? Because especially I see so many people burning themselves out because they're like, I have to do all of these things
Yep.
equally. Because
Yes.
balance implies I have to be perfect at this and
Yes.
perfect at that and do all these things, whatever. And I was talking at the time about harmony.
Mm.
And what comes to me straight away when I'm considering this myth of balance is like, imagine a painting and you say, I have to use the exact same amount of color for each color.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've got a painting with the exact same amount of green and the same amount of blue and the same amount of yellow, whatever. That painting is not going to inspire much, most likely. I mean, it would be, I don't know. I kind of now at this point, I sort of want to see it, but we know we're really looking for harmony. We're really looking at how do these things fit together? How do they feel when I'm doing them? Can I be fully with them? Am I fully with them
Yeah.
without striving, without toiling, without spinning? Can I just be with it? And
Mm.
can I really kind of embrace that? And I think letting go, and again, I mean, we're wordsmithing, we're playing with words, but letting go of this idea that somehow things need to be, like in this flat place of what everyone's saying. Again, I would highly urge anyone listening, like what everyone's saying, as much as possible, don't listen. If everyone's like, we need to do it this way, or there's one of the things I would say, like, if someone tells me 5 steps to something, I sort of run in the other direction. Cause I'm like, and I used to say that stuff. So I'm not
Yeah.
judging. I used to do that all the time, but I'm like, it's so misleading
Yeah.
because it's your canvas.
Yeah.
It's your canvas. And when you really decide, again, going back to some of those earlier points, like this thing is so important to me. Let me put some of that color in. Let me put that splash of this color in.
Yeah.
Let me start prioritizing that. You're going to see this just magnificent painting start to take form.
Yeah.
And that's harmony and that's beauty. And I think that's what we are.
Nice. And I think we could all use a little bit more of that in the workplace, right? And to be able to connect with that within ourselves in the workplace. Imagine how different things would be.
Yeah.
Hmm. Courtney, what's one takeaway that you want our listeners to take from this conversation? If there was only one, what would it be?
Mm. Relaxing into the idea that it's all okay.
Mm.
Even though I know sometimes it doesn't feel that way. Lately, I was reminded of this movie that I saw so long ago, Shakespeare in Love, where the director's running around and everything's really frantic. And he keeps saying, if everything's not okay, it's not the end.
Mm.
And the other day, my nephew said to me, at the end of the day, everything makes sense. So whichever one of those you want to pull from, it's all okay. If it's, if it's not all okay, it's not the end. And at the end of the day, everything makes sense. Whichever one of those you want to pull from, like those are anchors to remind you that all of this is a play. And
Yeah.
again, we're not going to get to the end of our lives and say, man, I really wish I'd spent more hours in the office. We're
Yeah.
going to get to the end of our lives and say, what an amazing painting my life was.
Yeah. I love that. Amazing. Courtney, where can our listeners come and follow your work and find your work? Obviously, I've got your latest book, which is Give Yourself Permission, and that's now out on audiobook, I believe.
Yes.
And I would urge anybody to read that. Courtney's been kind enough to send me a physical copy, but I've also got the digital copy as well from our first conversation. And I'm also going to put the link to our other podcast into the show notes here as well, so they can come and listen to that. But where else can our listeners find you, and what else do they need to know about what it is you're up to?
Great, thank you. So it's Cortney without a U. So it's CORT.
Yep.
And we often use the short URL CORT Inc. as in incorporated. So cortinc.com. That's just the general website. You can get more information about the books. You can find a few podcast recordings there, but we come out so often. I've done hundreds of interviews for both of the books. So, but you can find some more resources there. You can find a little meditation to just kind of quickly reset your nervous system if you're looking for a quick fix in the middle of the day. And I'm also, again, at Cortney McDermott, CORTNEY McDermott on social media. So you can find me on Instagram, you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'd love to connect with your listeners. Anyone who's who's doing this, who's made it this far in the podcast is really committed to what everything we've been talking about, I think. I mean, really committed to shifting those paradigms and actually being that difference.
Yeah,
So I'm excited. I'm excited to connect with everyone who's
amazing.
listening.
I have no doubt that they will. Thank you so much, time again, for your energy, for your wisdom, for just showing up and really just giving all of yourself to this conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for the incredible work you're doing. I love you.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode and you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode.
Please share it with a friend who you think might benefit.
Spread the word. That's how we're going to impact the world, by helping each other.
We appreciate you so much, and as always, unconditional love and wellness to you.